Hello, and welcome to another episode of I Demand a Homestead. My name's Amanda, and today we're going to talk about something that, a topic that I absolutely love, which is how to turn maple syrup into maple sugar. And this is actually like way easier than you would actually think. So if you happen to kind of have any maple trees and you have tapped them and made maple syrup, then you can easily turn that into sugar. And so we have on our kind of acre and a half, we have 5 maple trees that we tap every usually somewhere around March, maybe end of February. And from those 5 maple trees, we normally get somewhere, well, depending on the year, sometimes we'll only get like about 8 liters of maple syrup, but this year we got like 13 liters of maple syrup. And that is way more maple syrup than we actually need for our family of 3. We found that we probably really only need about 3 liters of maple syrup for the whole year. So usually what I'll do is I will turn the rest into sugar, and that's what we kind of use instead of brown sugar for our baking, cooking, for coffee, that kind of stuff. And then we also have some bees that we keep for honey, and the honey we use instead of white sugar. So this is a nice way if you're really kind of trying to get away from using industrial sugar. This can be an easy way to do that. So what you need for this is really simple. Obviously you need your maple syrup. You also need, and this is really important, you need a candy thermometer. So you can buy these probably from any kind of department store that has like a kitchen section. This is just a thermometer that will measure in either Fahrenheit or Celsius, and it's going to go up to, mine goes up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius, but it's just called a candy thermometer. So that'll work. You can also use one of those digital thermometer probes that they use for like barbecuing and for making roasts and stuff. That'd work too, but I always have just used a candy thermometer. We need a big pot to put our maple syrup in, because when we get the maple syrup going, it's going to bubble up. So you want something that's fairly high, so it's going to give it enough space to bubble up and expand a little bit. So we're going to need a big pot. I'm also going to use a stand mixer for when we're going to be mixing up the syrup when it's going to turn into sugar. You can also just use like a wooden spoon and stir it in the pot. I like the stand mixer because I find it's a little easier, it's less work for me, and it creates a pretty consistent product. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up our 2 jars of maple syrup. This is from this year, 2022, and I'm just going to pour them into the pot. This stuff is kind of just filtered just to take out the big bits of stuff. There's still like a little bit of sugar sand and other things in here, but I don't really worry about that either. Okay, so our pot is probably only about a third full, and that is totally fine with me because, again, as I said, it's going to bubble up. I am going to turn on the heat, and I'm going to turn this somewhere around medium high. And then the other thing I'm going to do is, because this is going to bubble up, you want to kind of put something around the inside rim of the pot here that will prevent it from going any further. So what you can actually use is butter. What I have is a little butter wrapper that I save for greasing dishes and things, or baking pans. And I'm just going to grease this up just on the inside. And then when the kind of bubbles hit that, they just kind of come back down again. It just kind of breaks up the bubbles. And this is a great thing. We're probably not going to need it too much because I doubt it's going to get really bubbly on here. But that'll be just in case. And then I'm going to take my digital thermometer, or my candy thermometer rather. This one's not digital. And then I'm going to put this in here. Okay, just to get it set up while it's not too hot. And I'm making sure my thermometer doesn't touch the bottom of the pot, but it's just above that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to wait for this to come to a boil. You don't need to stir it. This is, you know, eventually you're going to need to keep an eye on it. Once it comes to a boil, it's going to take about 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, depending, but that's how long it'll take. Okay, so we'll come back when this is boiling again. Now our syrup has started to boil again. And you can see that it's like 2/3 of the way up the pot here, right? So it's getting a little high. So I'm going to turn it down a bit so that it's not going to come up and over. And it should kind of level out. But you can kind of see why you wanted a pot that's that big, right? Because that amount of syrup has expanded quite a lot. So I've got it on medium, just a little bit above medium, and I'm just turning it down a little bit more. This is why you want to keep an eye on it, right? So I said medium high, but you're obviously going to have to kind of use your own judgment to make sure that it's not going to boil over, but you still want a nice rapid boil. So my candy thermometer, if we zoom in, we can see that that is just over 100 degrees Celsius, okay? And we're looking for it to be about 128 degrees Celsius, or about 260 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what we're looking for. So this has taken probably a little bit longer than I thought. It was about 35 minutes. And you can see the color has changed quite a bit. It's gotten darker, and we are at 125 degrees Celsius. So that's kind of exactly where we wanted to be. Probably took a little bit longer because I had to turn the temperature down because it just kind of wanted to keep getting up to the point where it was going to boil over. So I had it kind of more on medium-low. All right, so at this point what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the heat, and we're going to leave it in the pot for about 5 minutes to cool down before we pour it into the stand mixer. I found that that's a good idea because otherwise it likes to continue kind of boiling over once it's in the stand mixer, and that kind of makes a bit of a mess. All right, so we'll turn it off and we'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, so this has cooled off for 5 minutes. Now we're going to pour it into the mixing bowl of our stand mixer. So I have my stand mixer running on slow speed. And then what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to take just a little spatula, and I'm just going to kind of scrape around the edges there just to keep it from solidifying too quickly on the edges. So I'm just going to kind of do that as this keeps running. So now it's beginning to start to lighten a little bit. It's probably been going for about 3 or 4 minutes. And it's going to progressively get more light. And you can kind of even just see it as it's happening there. It's now kind of continuing to get lighter and lighter in color. And it's starting to thicken up as it's starting to cool. Getting thicker yet. And at this point I'm going to turn the stand mixer speed up a little bit because it's really kind of getting the engine struggling a little bit. You can kind of hear it. No, maybe I won't. Probably what I will do is I'll stop it and I'll just kind of get some of that sugar off the beater there. Starting to break apart now and beginning to kind of start to look a little bit more like sugar. I'm going to let this go for a while, probably like another 5 minutes or so. I'm going to let my I'll turn off the mixer every couple of minutes just for a few seconds just to let it cool down because you can hear it's working pretty hard. And then we'll kind of pour it into a dish to let it cool. So now our sugar has pretty much granulated. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pour it into just a baking dish just to kind of allow that to continue to cool so that way it doesn't kind of want to like form a big giant block, and that way I can keep stirring it a little bit as it's cooling. So there is our beautiful pan full of maple sugar, and if I kind of reach in here you can see it still kind of wants to clump up. And as it cools, it will kind of become a little bit more granulated, but the texture is very much right now like a brown sugar. It will get a little bit more granular in nature as it cools, as I said. So what we'll do is we'll let that cool, and I'll continue to kind of stir it and break it up a little bit, and then we'll package it into jars tomorrow. So we'll see you then. So now it's one day later and our sugar has cooled. I've come by every so often and just kind of mixed it up with my hands. And it does form kind of like, kind of like a brown sugar does. It's a little bit more powdery, and it does tend to kind of stick together a little bit more. So I tend to have to break it up a little bit before we bake with it. The other thing is that it does have these kind of like little chunks in there. I've seen other people kind of use a coffee grinder to grind these up. I usually just kind of break them up before I bake with it or cook with it with my hand or with a fork or something. I don't bother with the coffee grinder. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to load it into jars. So I'm just going to take like a canning kind of, I don't even know what you call this thing, but anyway, something that you use to kind of fill up your canning jars. And then I'm just going to get a scoop and just start filling that up in there. Okay, so I will keep doing that, and then we'll come back when we've got it all done and you can see how much we get. All right, so we are all done packing up our maple sugar. So we started with 2 liters of maple syrup, and you can see we have got 2 and almost 3 liters of sugar, which is kind of the way it normally goes, which is kind of nice that you end up with more sugar than you started out with syrup. I know that my husband and my son had been picking at that sugar and eating little bits of it kind of, so probably we would have had a little bit more than this, but they can't seem to keep themselves away from the maple sugar while it's cooling on the counter, and I really don't blame them. So that is kind of how that works. So thank you for joining us in another episode of I Demand a Homestead. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to enjoy my maple sugar, and we don't have to buy brown sugar for months and months and months. So if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to press the subscribe button, and we will see you again soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.